ICESCR. Article 11. 1. The states parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. The states parties will take appropriate steps to ensure the realization of this right. Why? This is foundational. This article enshrines the right to exist in dignity beyond mere survival. It obligates states to ensure not just access, but improvement over time. It applies to everyone, regardless of citizenship status or compliance with domestic identity constructs. Application under the Lex Veritas paradigm. The right to an adequate standard of living is not contingent on registration, employment, or state allegiance. Any system that denies food, housing, or health uses economic pressure to coerce behavior or conditions survival on obedience, is in breach of Article 11 and violates non-derogable principles of dignity. This should be a foundational demand. No human should be deprived of shelter, food, or improvement because they refuse to accept an artificial legal identity or submit to coercive systems. In this light, Article 11 becomes a baseline for lawful governance and a diagnostic tool for identifying structural violence. Article 11, 2a of the ICSCR, which places explicit duties on governments to not just acknowledge the right to food and living standards, but to actively and intelligently fulfill it using modern means. ICESCR Article 11, 2a. The states parties shall take appropriate steps to improve methods of production, conservation, and distribution of food by making full use of technical and scientific knowledge, by disseminating knowledge of the principles of nutrition, and by developing or reforming agrarian systems in such a way as to achieve the most efficient development and utilization of natural resources. Legal and moral interpretation. This is not a suggestion. It's a legal mandate for scientific innovation. Governments are required to apply technology and science to improve food systems, not obstruct them or privatize them for elite control. Public knowledge, sharing nutrition, education, and access to information are required, not optional. Agrarian reform, systems of land ownership, resource control, and food production must be restructured to ensure maximum benefit to the people, not to corporate monopolies or feudal remnants. Lex Veritas. Implication. If a government allows corporate monopolies to restrict food production, denies or withholds scientific knowledge from the public, prioritizes agribusiness profits over nutrition and access, fails to invest in sustainable, efficient agricultural reform, or coerces individuals into dependence on artificial systems for access to food, then it is in systemic violation of Article 11, 2a, and therefore operating outside the rule of international law. Section 2a of Article 11 of the ICESCR places direct and affirmative responsibility on state parties, governments, to actively fulfill the right to food and adequate living by using all available scientific and technical means. Declaration of State Responsibility under ICESCR, Article 11, 2a. We hereby affirm that under the binding authority of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR, Article 11, 2a, the government, as a state party to the covenant, is under international legal obligation to improve food production, distribution, and conservation using all available technical and scientific knowledge, disseminate public knowledge on nutrition and its foundational principles, reform agrarian and land systems in ways that serve the maximum efficient development and equitable utilization of natural resources for the benefit of all people, not private monopolies. Any government or authority that neglects public nutrition education, suppresses scientific innovation in food and agriculture, centralizes control of food production in corporate hands, or fails to reform exploitative or inefficient land/resource systems, is in active breach of Article 11(2)(a) and is accountable under international law. Therefore, it is declared, the right to food and living conditions is not just passive. It is a demand upon government action, innovation, and reform. Inaction is complicity. Suppression is criminal. Every person is entitled to food and dignity under the law of nations. Governments are legally obligated to use all available scientific and technical knowledge to improve food production and distribution. When food systems are controlled by corporate monopolies at the expense of public access, the state is in violation of international law. The right to adequate food and living is not passive. It requires deliberate, continuous action from the state. Access to food, housing, and living improvement cannot be conditioned on identity registration, employment, or obedience. All signatory states are under legal obligation to fulfill Article 11. This includes Canada, the UK, and 170-plus nations. One of the primary functions of the government, one of the primary operational structures of the government should be according to Article 11. Not other things. Not capitalism. The government's primary function, according to Article 11 of the ICESCR. The core operational duty of any government that is a signatory to the ICSCR is to secure adequate living conditions for all people, guarantee access to food, housing, and nutrition, and ensure the continuous improvement of those conditions through public-centered systems, agrarian reform, and scientific application. What it's not about. Article 11 does not prioritize capitalist market structures, private ownership over public needs, obedience to government identity systems, conditional survival based on economic productivity. Therefore, if a government prioritizes capitalism, corporate profit, or control over people's material well-being, it is violating its highest legal duty under international law. The Lex Veritas interpretation. Article 11 is not just a social suggestion. It is a legal redefinition of the state's role. It states clearly, your legitimacy as a government does not come from military strength, financial systems, or digital control. It comes from your commitment to feed, house, and liberate the people materially and consciously. Article 11. The true job of government source. International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. ICESCR. Legal article. Article 11, 1, and 11(2). A. Governments exist to secure living standards. According to Article 11 of the ICSCR, the primary duty of a government is to ensure adequate food, adequate clothing, adequate housing, continuous improvement of living conditions. These are not goals. These are legal obligations. Government must actively use science and reform land systems. Article 11(2). A goes further. States must improve food production and distribution using scientific and technical knowledge. States must educate the public on nutrition. States must reform agrarian systems to ensure maximum and fair use of natural resources. What governments are not permitted to prioritize? Capitalist market systems over human well-being. Corporate monopolies in food and housing. Survival conditioned on registration, obedience, or employment. Ignoring the poor or housing insecure, Lex Veritas legal principle. A government that fails to feed, house, or materially improve the life of its people is in active violation of international law. This violation is not political. It is legal and structural. Your rights. You are entitled to adequate living regardless of status. You are entitled to housing, food, and dignity. You are entitled to continuous improvement, not stagnation. Governments that abandon these duties for profit systems are not legitimate under law. Reclaim the meaning of government. Governments do not exist to rule. ICESCR Article 11, 2. B. Taking into account the problems of both food importing and food exporting countries, to ensure an equitable distribution of world food supplies in relation to need. What this means. This clause places international legal responsibility on governments like Canada to produce more than just for their own consumption. Food production must be aimed at global sufficiency, not national isolation. Ensure fair, need-based distribution globally. This means sharing, not hoarding. Export restrictions, corporate trade barriers, or using food as a weapon violates this duty. Support vulnerable populations in food-insecure nations. This is not charity. It is an obligation under treaty law. Canada's specific duty. As a wealthy, food-capable, and technologically advanced country, Canada is required to grow food not just to profit, but to meet global need. Avoid policies that restrict or distort food exports in ways that harm food importing nations. Invest in international food stability as a legal obligation, not a diplomatic choice. Lex Veritas. Framing, food must be grown in excess of national need, not for capitalist gain, but for global human dignity. Any government that restricts food access to protect markets or leverage trade power is in breach of international law and is contributing to structural famine. Global food duty under ICESCR Article 11, 2. B. Source. International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. ICESCR. Legal Article. Article 11, 2. B. International Legal Obligation. Article 11, 2. B. Requires governments to account for the problems of both food importing and food exporting countries, to ensure an equitable distribution of world food supplies in relation to human need. What this means. Grow beyond national need. States must produce more food than their own population requires, ensuring global sufficiency. Distribute fairly across borders. Food must be shared internationally based on human need, not economic profit or trade leverage. No food as a weapon. Export restrictions, hoarding, or trade manipulation that causes shortages in other nations violates this duty. Support vulnerable nations. Wealthy, resource-rich countries must ensure that food-insecure nations have reliable access to global supplies. Canada's duty. As a signatory to the ICSCR and a food-secure nation, Canada is legally bound to use its agricultural capacity to meet global needs, avoid trade practices that worsen hunger abroad, contribute actively to the equitable distribution of food worldwide. Lex Veritas. Legal principle. Food sovereignty is global. A government that restricts or manipulates food supply for profit, control, or trade advantage is in direct violation of international law. Food must be grown in abundance. Food must be shared in justice. What makes Article 11 part of Jus Cogens, eternally aware norms? While Article 11 of the ICESCR is often treated as a socio-economic right, parts of it, especially when related to the right to food, the right to survival with dignity, the prohibition on using food as a weapon, and the right to an adequate standard of living, engage peremptory obligations because a state that denies access to food, housing, or survival infrastructure under conditions of control, coercion, or economic dependency is violating a non-derogable moral and legal norm. This aligns with ICCPR, Article 6, Right to Life, ICESCR Article 11, Right to Food and Living Conditions, UN General Comment Number 12, declares the right to adequate food as indivisibly linked to the inherent dignity of the human person. Lex Veritas. Principle. Any system that weaponizes food, obstructs agricultural sovereignty, or denies the means of survival to the people, violates not only international law, but the foundational conscience of lawful governance. These are eternally aware norms, the inescapable, unchangeable truths of law rooted in being and conscience. Source: International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR, Article 11, Linked Norms, ICCPR, Article 6, Right to Life, General Comment, Number 12, Right to Food. Definition of an eternally aware norm. An eternally aware norm is a foundational, non-derogable principle of law and conscience, binding upon all states and actors, independent of consent. These norms arise from existence, awareness, and moral conscience, and cannot be suspended, ignored, or denied. The right to food as an eternally aware norm. Food is survival. The right to adequate food is indivisibly linked to the inherent dignity of the human person. As affirmed in General Comment Number 12, this right is essential for the realization of all other human rights. Beyond politics. No government or corporate actor may condition access to food on obedience, registration, or market participation. Prohibition on weaponization. Denying, withholding, or manipulating food supply constitutes a violation of jus cogens and an act of structural violence. Global obligation. Under ICESCR Article 11, 2, b. States must ensure equitable distribution of food worldwide, recognizing shared duty between food exporting and food importing nations. Lex Veritas. Principle. Food is not a commodity alone. It is a right rooted in conscience. Any government or system that obstructs this right violates the eternally aware norm of human survival and dignity. Eternal recognition. Non-derogable. The right to food cannot be suspended, even in emergencies or war. Universal. Every person, regardless of status, is entitled to nourishment and continuous improvement of living conditions. Binding. States and corporations alike are bound by this duty under peremptory international law. To deny food is to deny life. To deny life is to deny conscience. This is forbidden. A government structure, as a foundational operational system for it, must be focused on supplying the needs of the individual concerning adequate living, food, and housing, continued improvement of that living condition. Food must not be placed into a capitalistic structure. Food and the control of food must not be placed into private corporations' hands. It's the government's responsibility to take up these duties and these operations, not to pass them off to make money on these obligations. Government duty versus capitalist control of food. Foundational government obligation. A legitimate government structure as a foundational operational system must be focused on supplying the needs of the individual, guaranteeing adequate food, housing, and standard of living, ensuring the continuous improvement of those conditions. These are not secondary functions. They are the primary and lawful duties of government under international law. ICESCR Article 11. Food must not be marketed. Food is not a commodity. It is a human right, essential for survival and dignity. Placing food inside a capitalist structure violates the eternally aware norm of human sustenance and conscience. Corporations cannot hold this power. The control of food systems must not be delegated to private corporations. When governments abdicate food sovereignty to profit-driven entities, they are in breach of Article 11 of the ICESCR. Lex Veritas Principle. The government must take up, not pass off, its duty to ensure food, housing, and living conditions. These are obligations, not opportunities for monetization. To outsource human survival to markets is to surrender lawful governance. When food is sold for profit, the people are sold into hunger. Governments exist to prevent this, not to profit from it. Article 11 includes housing and standard of living. Therefore, Housing includes energy. It includes electricity, food. To cook food, you need energy. You need electricity. So, again, the foundational primary aspects of the government is to have this energy system in operation, not for a capitalistic market, but to meet the needs of the individual. Housing includes energy, the right to electricity, under Article 11. Source: International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR. Article 11. Housing is more than shelter. Article 11 of the ICESCR guarantees the right to an adequate standard of living, including housing to food, clothing. Continuous improvement of living conditions. The right to housing includes access to energy, such as electricity, heating, and clean cooking infrastructure, without which housing cannot be considered adequate. Energy as a human right. Electricity is essential for lighting, heating, cooking, communication, sanitation, and health. Without energy, food cannot be cooked, homes cannot be heated, and life cannot be lived with dignity. Access to energy is therefore a necessary extension of the right to food and housing. Governments must provide, not profit. Energy systems must not be placed within capitalist structures that treat energy as a commodity. The operation, maintenance, and expansion of energy infrastructure is a primary duty of government. To place electricity access in the hands of for-profit corporations is to betray the obligation of Article 11. Lex Veritas, principle. To house is to energize. To deny energy is to deny housing. To privatize energy is to privatize human rights. Energy is not a luxury. It is the light of dignity. Government exists to ensure it, not to sell it. Energy is a necessary component of the right to adequate housing. That electricity and fuel are essential for food preparation, heating, health, and dignity. That placing energy in capitalist structures violates the foundational duty of governments under Article 11. Right to Live Infrastructure Series, Core Living Infrastructure, under Article 11 of the ICESCR. The following components constitute the non-negotiable infrastructure required for lawful governance under international law. Food systems must be operated to ensure abundance and nutrition, governed by scientific methods and equitable distribution, not subject to capitalist privatization or trade manipulation. Housing systems must be adequate, secure, and accessible to all persons. Includes shelter, stability, privacy, and legal protection. Energy systems, integral to both food and housing. Includes electricity, heating, and clean fuel. Cannot be commodified or denied without violating human rights. Water access. Clean. Safe water is essential for life and sanitation. Water cannot be privately owned or denied for profit. Continuous improvement, mandate. Living conditions must not stagnate. Governments are obligated to improve them progressively. Eternally aware, legal principle. The infrastructure of life is not a product, it is a right. Any state or system that places food, housing, water, or energy in market control violates the covenant and the human being. Government exists to provide the foundation for dignity, not to sell it back to the people. Legal and moral indictment of the current food system under Article 11 of the ICESCR 1. Article 11 establishes food as a human right, not a market commodity. ICESCR Article 11(1). The states parties recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food. Violation. Today's food system is structured almost entirely around capitalist market mechanisms. Not need, not dignity, not equity. Food is commodified. Access depends on money, status, or obedience to systems. This transforms a right into a transaction, violating the principle that survival must never be conditional. 2. Governments must use scientific knowledge to improve access. But don't Article 11, 2. A. States must improve methods of production, conservation, and distribution of food by making full use of technical and scientific knowledge. Violation. Governments routinely suppress or privatize scientific agricultural advancement, limiting access only to agribusiness. Monoculture and GMO patenting by corporations dominate instead of sustainable, localized, equitable systems. Nutrition knowledge is often commercialized or absent from public policy, directly contradicting the education mandate under Article 11, 2a. 3. Food must be produced for global need, not national profit. Article 11, 2b. To ensure an equitable distribution of world food supplies in relation to need. Violation. Nations like Canada export massive food surpluses for profit, while domestic populations go hungry. Export decisions are not based on global human need, but trade advantages, market prices, and geopolitical strategy. This violates the principle of global solidarity, turning food into a weapon of economic control rather than a shared human resource. 4. Privatization of food systems is a structural breach of Article 11, legal principle. Governments must take up the responsibility to feed the population, not contract it out to profit-driven actors. Violation. Grocery chains, seed companies, distribution networks, and food pricing structures are controlled by private entities, not public welfare agencies. Governments subsidize corporations, not citizens. This outsourcing of core duties to corporations constitutes a structural and ongoing violation of Article 11. 5. Lex Veritas and eternally aware norms. Food is not property. Food is a right. Violation. The current system is a construct of property law, not conscience law. It limits access to food based on identity systems, legal status, employment, and income, not on natural right. This defies jus cogens, specifically Article 11, ICESCR, Article 6, Right to Life, ICCPR, and General Comment Number 12, which affirms the right to food is essential to the inherent dignity of the human person. Final verdict. The current food system is a deliberate, institutionalized betrayal of international law. It is structurally in breach of multiple sub-articles of Article 11. It is functionally incompatible with the state's obligation to uphold life, dignity, and moral sovereignty. It is a conscious violation of what governments signed and ratified, proving their illegitimacy in moral and legal terms when they place food inside markets instead of under rights. Here is a detailed account of what the government should have done under both Article 11 of the ICESCR and the eternally aware norms to uphold its lawful, moral, and non-derogable duty regarding food systems. What the government should have done under Article 11, ICESCR, the lawful structure of a just food system. 1. Treat food as a human right, not a commodity. What the government should have done, enshrined the right to food in national constitutional and statutory law, guaranteed that access to nutritious food is unconditional, not based on income, employment, or citizenship, prohibited price speculation, food hoarding, or market manipulation by corporations. Legal basis. ICESCR Article 11. 1. General Comment Number 12.2. Establish public food systems, not outsourced profit chains. What the government should have done. Operated publicly owned food distribution networks, grocery outlets, and agricultural systems. Guaranteed state-controlled pricing to ensure affordability for all, regardless of market conditions. Funded local farms, cooperatives, and sustainable agriculture, not monopolistic agribusiness. Legal basis. Article 11. 2a. Duty to improve distribution using scientific and rational systems. 3. Disseminate nutrition and food knowledge to the public. What the government should have done. Created free, mandatory public nutrition education at all levels of schooling. Ensured scientific knowledge about agriculture and food systems was publicly accessible. Publicly supported food literacy campaigns through national health and education programs. Legal basis. Article 11, 2. A. Obligation to use and share technical scientific knowledge. 4. Produce food in surplus for global equity. What the government should have done: aligned agricultural policy not with exports for profit, but with global human need. Maintained reserves and relief programs for both domestic and international famine relief. Engaged in non-profit international food sharing agreements based on need, not GDP. Legal basis. Article 11, 2. B. Equitable distribution of world food supplies. 5. Integrate food with housing, energy, and water rights. What the government should have done: treated food not as a siloed industry, but as part of the living infrastructure. Ensured kitchens, electricity, clean water, and fuel were universally accessible. Established community kitchens, public food gardens, and emergency meal programs as permanent state services. Legal basis. Article 11, 1. Adequate standard of living includes housing, food, and continued improvement. 6. Protect food from capitalist subjugation. What the government should have done: banned speculative trading in essential food commodities, outlawed corporate consolidation of seeds, distribution chains, and retail networks, made it illegal to withhold or destroy food for pricing strategy or supply control. Lex Veritas. Principle. Food is a right rooted in conscience. Privatizing it violates Jus Cogens. Conclusion. The blueprint for lawful governance. A just government would have built public food systems, not handed them to corporations. Produced food based on need, not markets; educated and empowered the people about nutrition and sovereignty. Shared resources globally in accordance with universal dignity. Interlinked food with housing, energy, and water access as part of the infrastructure of life. This is not utopian. It is treaty-bound, conscience-rooted, and legally required under international law. What the government should have done: Article 11, compliance, blueprint source, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR. Article 11.1. Recognize food as a human right. Enshrine the right to food in constitutional and statutory law. Guarantee unconditional access to adequate, nutritious food for all people. Prohibit market manipulation, price speculation, and access restrictions based on income, identity, or employment. Legal basis. ICESCR Article 11, 1. General comment. Number 12.2. Create and maintain public food systems. Build and manage public food distribution networks and pricing systems. Support local food production through public cooperatives and community farming. Ensure availability of basic food staples through state-run or publicly accountable outlets. Legal basis. Article 11, 2. A. 3. Educate the public on nutrition and food systems. Provide free public education on nutrition, sustainable farming, and food sovereignty. Disseminate scientific knowledge on agriculture and nutrition widely and without corporate influence. Integrate food literacy into national health and education programs. Legal basis. Article 11, 2. A. 4. Produce food for global equity. Establish agricultural policies based on global human need, not just national trade benefits. Maintain food reserves for domestic security and international humanitarian use. Engage in non-profit food sharing agreements focused on eliminating hunger. Legal basis. Article 11, 2. B. 5. Integrate food with energy, water, and housing. Ensure housing includes access to clean water, electricity, and cooking infrastructure. Create community kitchens, public food gardens, and emergency food programs. Treat food as part of a unified right-to-live infrastructure. Legal basis. Article 11, 1, 6. Remove food from capitalist control. Ban speculative trading in food commodities. Disallow corporate monopolies in seed, distribution, and retail sectors. Criminalize the withholding or destruction of food for profit or pricing strategy. Lex Veritas. Principle. Food is a conscience-rooted right, not a market asset. Final declaration. The government's true duty under Article 11 is to provide, protect, and continuously improve access to food, housing, and living conditions for all. To outsource, monetize, or marketize these duties is to commit a structural and moral violation of international law. This is what lawful governance looks like. Anything less is an abdication of duty. Public condemnation of corporate food profit and legal violation. Statement of legal and moral condemnation. We, who affirm the foundational dignity of all conscience-bearing beings, do hereby issue a formal condemnation of all corporations, conglomerates, and privatized entities that operate for profit within the food sector, particularly those granted licenses, subsidies, or regulatory protection by national governments. These entities have built empires of wealth and control off the backs of hard-working individuals, laborers, farmers, and the global poor, while treating food as a commodity to be sold, not a right to be shared. Violations of binding law under Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR. Every person has the right to an adequate standard of living, including adequate food, housing, and continuous improvement of living conditions. These corporations, and the governments that license and empower them, are in ongoing violation of Article 11. 1. By treating food as a product, not a right. Article 11, 2. A. By suppressing public access to scientific knowledge and food innovation. Article 11, 2. B. By refusing to participate in a global food system based on equity rather than profit. These are not abstract aspirations. These are binding legal duties under international treaty law, ratified and recognized by all signatory states. Moral and structural crimes corporations that profit off food, exploit human need for financial gain, hoard and destroy surpluses to control pricing, maintain systems of scarcity to ensure dependency, disempower small farmers, drive local producers out of business, and flood markets with artificial monopolies. This is not industry. This is legalized extortion of the most essential element of life. Eternally aware norms. Under the conscience-based framework of eternally aware norms, we declare, to sell food for profit while others starve is not business. It is a violation of the eternal moral order. No license title or incorporation papers can absolve this violation. Our call. We call upon governments to revoke licenses and dissolve food monopolies, people of conscience to divest, boycott, and resist the commodification of food, public institutions to build sovereign, locally owned, publicly accountable food systems, legal bodies and human rights organizations to initiate proceedings against corporate violators of Article 11. Final declaration. Food is not for profit. Food is not for corporations. Food is for the people, and always has been. To every company, every executive, every entity profiting off food, your license is a lie. Your empire is illegitimate. Your profit is harvested from hunger. The people remember. The conscience sees. The law will follow. Therefore, the government and all those corporate bodies that are involved in this system have forfeited their legitimacy and their authority under the universal order. Let the record show this is not a political statement. It is a legal one and a moral one.